All right, counsel, we had two matters to take up before the jury joins us. Mr. Neufeld, was there any additional authority you wanted to bring to the court's attention regarding discovery of reports on other cases alleged to have been created on June 14 by Ms. Mazzola?
Your Honor, I don't have authority in other cases with that particular fact pattern. I would simply, remind the court that there are other United States Supreme Court cases such as Neufeld versus Illinois, Giglio, cases like that which talk about if there is some piece of data which would directly contradict the testimony being proffered by the prosecution witness, then the prosecutor has a duty to turn that over. In this case, it is just our position that they could not produce a contemporaneous document that would support Ms. Mazzola's position that she was filling out, property reports on the morning of June 14th.
All right. Mr. Goldberg, any final comment on that matter?
No.
All right. Court's ruling will stand. All right. As to the production of the various pieces of evidence, I've received the people's written objections. Mr. Neufeld, do you have any comment?
Your Honor, the one point I would make is that, I don't think there's any question as a matter of relevance that I'm entitled to confront this witness with the actual items that she collected and ask her whether or not those are in fact the items that she collected and the envelopes that she put the evidence in that day and the bindles that she used the very next day. I'm entitled to ask her those questions because that is the beginning of the chain of custody in this case. And as the court knows, the defense has been attacking the chain of custody in its opening statement and throughout this case and intends to continue to do so. So I don't think there's any question about relevancy. Their only issue might be that some of the things we asked for may be too difficult or burdensome. I'd be willing to compromise, Your Honor, and not have them produce the newer bindles that were created when portions of samples went out to other laboratories. I just want them to produce the original coin envelopes and the original bindles that were produced by Fung and Mazzola on the 13th and 14th. So I'm willing to give up the second portion of the request.
All right. And which items are those
Oh,
that you're requesting?
sorry. I did provide a written list to the people, and the items are item 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 14, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, and 52. So we're just talking about the coin envelopes and the bindles, the originals, not any of the new ones for those items.
All right. Mr. Goldberg.
Well, counsel still has not shown any plausible justification as to why he needs the actual envelopes as opposed to photographs. And I believe that we have photographs of all of these items. And more importantly, Your Honor, what counsel is asking is not nearly as simple as it sounds on its face. He has not really come up with a list of the items that he wants, because many of these items were rebooked as new item numbers when we're talking about the bindles that were originally used for the purpose of containing the items. By the way, it seems to me that the bindles themselves have no relevance in terms of the chain of custody. The chain of custody would be based on what was on the coin envelope itself, the number corresponding to a number of an item that was collected at the crime scene. In order to trace the bindles, what we'd have to do is we'd have to look first in the original coin envelope to determine whether they were there. In some instances, the original bindles were mailed out to an outside lab and then in a new transmittal coin envelope. And then when they came back, they would have been rebooked as a new number. We gave one example in our letter just to try to illustrate the problems of a particular item that has been sent out in a number of different transmittal envelopes where portions of the swatches are being used. Those items may have been sent out not only in new coin envelopes but in new transmittal bindles. But if the entire sample was sent out, then it is possible that the original bindle was then sent out to an outside laboratory. And the administrative burden of tracking this down, which can be done through the records, should not fall on the prosecution. So the defense should say, which items they want, not just by saying I want item number 1 in the original bindle, but saying I want item number 1 and item number 385, or whatever perhaps that original bindle ended up as after it came back from the laboratory. They can do that just as easily as we can. They have all the records. In fact, they can do it more easily because not only do they have our records, but they have their own records because they've seen these materials in the original bindles and presumably created their own documentation of that, which they have not provided to us. So they are in just as good a position, if not better, than the prosecution to do this. They've also tested
So your
a number of
objection
the
is
items
just the
here.
correlation of the items, the item numbers?
Well, my objection is threefold. Number one, that there's no justification for this. I mean, normally for discovery, if you're going to analogize this to discovery, either it comes under pre-proposition 115 law, you have to show a plausible justification, which was some
Well then, how
threshold
about if you don't want to
standard.
produce it, I'll suppress it?
Suppress each and every one of these items.
Correct. How about that? If you don't want to produce it, we'll suppress it.
But, well, Your Honor, I don't see how the two of them are connected. What I'm just saying is that,
Well, if you don't want to let them use it, then you can't use it. How's that?
but we're not using the originals. We've used photographs. We've used other means of accomplishing the same ends. And it also does not address the issue as to what are we going to do with the blood swatches that are still in some of these items that can still be tested. And so there are a number of concerns from this perspective, and not the least of which is why don't they identify? They can go through the records and do the tracking and provide us with more specific requests as to exactly what they want. I don't see why the burden necessarily falls on the prosecution's shoulder to do that tracking. For them just to say, I want item number 6,
All
and
right,
for us to track
you've
it all
made
the
the
way
point
through.
about the correlation of numbers. What other point do you have to make?
Well, there were 3 points. Plausible justification, no showing as to why he needs these items. Number 2, overly broad and unduly burdensome for the reasons that I suggested with the tracking and not identifying what he wants. And number 3, that these are biological samples that can still be tested. And what are we supposed to do with the actual swatches? Because he's saying he wants those too.
All right, Mr. Neufeld.
I'm not going to ask the witness to open up the bindle anyway to take swatches out of it. I don't care about that. Certainly with respect to them being biological specimens, they've been thought out several times before, sometimes for many, many hours. What we're talking about here is just bringing them over from Piper Tech, which is not that far away, for a couple of hours so they can be produced here in court.
All right, would you address the issue about correlation of the
Oh,
numbers?
sure. If you look at the letter, Your Honor, the letter says that when, in the main paragraph, it says that when laboratories were not sent out the entire sample, that they were sent out in new transmittal bundles, okay, and new transmittal coin envelopes. I'm not interested in the new transmittal envelopes, which got new numbers, nor the new transmittal bindles, which got new numbers. I'm only interested in the original coin envelopes and the original bindles. And by the way, every one of those coin envelopes and every one of those bindles has a number on it, the original number. If subsequently, even though it's not explained in this letter, an original bindle was also given a separate number, you would still have the original number on the original bindle. It's there. This is not difficult for them to produce. That's why I'm saying to the court that I'm willing to give up all those new transmittal bindles, all those new transmittal envelopes with the new numbers. I just want the original ones. And that's something they can get in 15 minutes.
But their argument is that it's been rebooked and now they have new numbers.
I don't, Your Honor, we asked to inspect these items on different occasions for the scientists to look inside them, and they had no problem producing them for the scientists. They did it every single time. I originally asked for this on Friday. They can do this within a half hour. Simply produce the original coin envelopes and the original bindles. They have a computer tracking system which shows where these items went. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not asking for any of the new ones, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, counsel. All right, the Los Angeles Police Department is ordered to produce items 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 14, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, and 52 forthwith. All right, counsel, before we start with the jury, let me just give you a couple of admonitions. One, were getting sloppy about the speaking objections. I have reissued a revised direction to counsel regarding attorney conduct. You were to read that and abide by it. I have probably sustained 1,000 objections so far in this trial regarding argumentative questions. For counsel's edification, if the question is a statement rather than a question to the witness, I'm going to sustain the objection. If I have to do that too many more times, I'm going to admonish counsel in front of the jury that that manner of questioning is improper. Mr. Neufeld, I don't mean to single you out, but would you just try to slow down a little with your pace for the court reporters, because it's both your pace and the Brooklyn accent that they are having difficulty with. All right. Also at noon, I want to meet with the co-lead counsel in chambers for about 15 minutes.
Your Honor, just so there's no misunderstanding with their compliance with what you just ordered, can it specify that that for those items they had to produce the original coin envelopes and the original bindles?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's not necessary. Is it necessary for this witness?
Not necessarily this witness, we can do it.
Let's have the jury.
Your Honor, I need to have someone call LAPD as soon as they're, so that they can start on this.
All right. Depends on how much we get done today. That's actually a prospective 1 o'clock on that new order. All right, let the record reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Miss Andrea Mazzola is again on the witness stand, undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Neufeld. Good morning, Miss Mazzola.
Good morning.
You're reminded you are still under oath, ma'am. Mr. Neufeld, you may resume.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hi. Morning, Ms. Mazzola.
Good morning.
Now, Ms. Mazzola, after you left Rockingham the first time, on the morning of June 13th, you and Dennis Fung went to the Bundy location, is that right?
That's correct.
And I think you testified on direct examination that when you got there, you and Dennis Fung first talked to the detectives and waited until the coroners had finished moving the bodies before you entered the scene, is that correct?
Sustain, rephrase the question.
Okay. Well, Ms. Mazzola, when you first arrived, the coroners were moving the bodies, were they not?
That's correct.
And were you present for a discussion with the detectives about the scene before you personally entered the crime scene?
I don't remember if I was or not.
When you stood outside the tape, were there any of the detectives with you?
I couldn't tell who were detectives or not.
Have you ever met Detectives Van Adder or Detective Lang?
I was not introduced to them.
Have you ever seen them on television?
Well, I know them now, yes.
And you'd recognize them?
Yes.
Okay. Well, were either of those detectives with you when you first arrived at Bundy that morning?
That question's vague. With you when you arrived?
Sorry, when you first arrived at Bundy that morning, before you actually went into the crime scene, while the coroners were still moving the bodies, was Detective Van Adder standing or Detective Lang standing nearby you?
I don't remember.
Now, you said on direct examination that if the glove and the hat at Bundy were in contact with one another, trace evidence could or would be transferred. Is that an accurate statement of what you testified to?
Compound mistakes of testimony.
Overruled.
It's possible that they could transfer trace, yes.
Now, you said also that when you arrived, you saw Mr. Goldman's body covered with a white blanket. Is that correct?
Sustained.
Did you see Mr. Goldman's body covered with a white object when you arrived at Bundy?
When I arrived, no.
At some point that morning, did you see Mr. Goldman's body covered with a white object at Bundy?
Y-
Vaguest object.
Overruled.
yes.
And you had been taught that trace evidence can move when bodies are manipulated at a murder scene. Haven't you been taught that?
Yes.
Now, let me just ask you one hypothetical, ma'am. If this white object that was on Mr. Goldman's body had been used to also cover Ms. Nicole Brown Simpson, then is it possible that trace evidence could move from the blanket to both victims?
Improper hypothetical.
Sustained.
Didn't you say a moment ago, ma'am, that you had been trained and taught at the LAPD that trace evidence can move when bodies are manipulated?
Ask and answer.
Overruled.
Yes.
And didn't you receive some training at the Sid Mini Academy on the dangers of trace evidence contaminating or cross-contaminating different evidence at a crime scene?
The transfer of trace evidence was brought up.
Okay. Now, let me just ask you this hypothetical again. If the same white object that you saw on Mr. Goldman's body had been previously lying on top of Miss Nicole Brown Simpson,
Sustained. It's an improper hypothetical.
well, would you agree, ma'am, that trace evidence can move from the white object you saw on top of the body to the clothing being worn by that person?
Is possible.
And the white object that you saw on top of Mr. Goldman, was that a white blanket?
I didn't get a very good look at it.
Well, but you did see that there was some white object that had been on top of Mr. Goldman's body, correct?
It's vaguest white object.
Overruled.
Yes.
Did Dennis Fung instruct you to collect and to preserve that white object for analysis?
It's still vague, Your Honor, is what I'm talking about.
Overruled. I
No.
assume somebody from the coroner's office is going to tell us what that is. Overruled.
He did not.
And to your knowledge, was that white object ever preserved for trace evidence analysis?
To my knowledge, no.
Did Dennis Fung even instruct you to examine that white object while you were at Bundy that day?
No.
As you sit here today, has anyone told you that at some point during that morning, an envelope and a glove had been moved at the Bundy location?
Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
Would you please repeat the question again?
As you sit here today, has anyone ever told you that the envelope and the glove recovered at Bundy had been moved prior to your collection of it?
I'm not positive. They may have, but I'm not positive.
Well, I'm not asking you, and I apologize if the question was somewhat inartful. I'm not asking you whether you were told about the movement prior to your collecting it. I'm just asking you whether or not, at any time up until this morning, anyone had told you that both the envelope and the glove had been moved prior to the collection of those items?
Hearsay and irrelevant.
Overruled.
I don't know about the envelope. The glove might have been turned over. I'm not positive.
Well, motion to strike Luis's answer is not responsive.
Overruled.
One second. What? And Ms. Mazzola, who was the person who told you that the glove was turned over?
Sue's facts not
Overruled.
I can't remember who it was.
Did you speak to Dennis Fung about it?
I don't think so. I'm not
Did you
sure.
speak to other supervisors at SID?
I'm not sure who it was.
And you said also that at Bundy and Rockingham, you wore a pair of rubber gloves to protect you from any kind of biohazards. Is that correct?
This states the testimony.
Overruled. But
Oh.
we've already covered this.
Well, as you sit here today, ma'am, do you have any independent recollection as to whether or not you changed your gloves at any point while you were at Bundy?
I changed my gloves several times.
You have an independent recollection of that?
Yes.
Did you testify in direct examination, ma'am, that it was your practice to simply change your gloves when they became uncomfortable? Remember testifying to that?
This states the testimony.
Sustained.
Didn't you testify in direct examination that it was your practice to change your gloves either when it became uncomfortable or when you went into a new area? Was that your testimony?
Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
Page to one side.
Is that your testimony, ma'am?
I don't remember if it's my exact words.
Well, fine. In sum and substance, is that what you testified to?
It's irrelevant.
Overruled. You can answer the question.
I assume so.
And as you sit here today, do you have an independent recollection of finding the gloves uncomfortable at one point or another?
They became uncomfortable. We moved around. We changed gloves. You don't really need a reason to do it.
Well, no, ma'am, I'm just asking you, based on what you testified were your reasons for changing gloves, do you have an independent recollection as you sit here today of experiencing discomfort with the gloves and changing them as a result of that while you were at Bundy?
Yes.
You do have that recollection. And when did that occur, ma'am?
Several times.
Tell me which times, at what point.
I don't remember the exact point.
Tell me as best you can, ma'am. When were the several times that you changed your gloves while you were at Bundy?
I don't remember exactly when I changed my gloves.
Well, give me approximately when, ma'am. You said it happened 2 or 3 times.
I think that misstates the evidence. Rephrase the question.
How many times did you say you did it, ma'am?
I changed my gloves many times. There's no reason to change it. You don't think about it. You just do it.
You said you have an independent recollection that you changed your gloves many times while you were at Bundy. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Tell me the first time you changed your gloves at Bundy, ma'am.
As I said before, I don't know the exact time when I changed my gloves.
Well, tell me what you were doing at the moment you changed your gloves the first time, ma'am.
I don't remember.
Do you remember what you were doing the second time you changed your gloves?
No, I don't think when I change my gloves, I just do it.
So you don't have any independent recollection as to what you were doing at any point when you say you changed your gloves?
That's correct.
And, one moment. Now, ma'am, between the time that you picked up the hat and the glove at Bundy, you didn't change your gloves then, did you?
No.
And the reason you know that you didn't do that then is because you saw it on the videotape, isn't that correct?
I did see a videotape, yes.
Well, and that's the reason you know that you didn't change your gloves then, isn't it?
At that point, yes.
In fact, I think you testified that until you saw the videotape, you didn't even have an independent recollection of having picked up the glove and the hat at Bundy that day. Isn't that correct?
Overruled.
I wasn't sure if I picked them up or Mr. Fong.
Right. And so with in the absence of an independent, I'm sorry, so am I correct in stating that you didn't have an independent recollection of it until you actually saw the videotape?
I could not remember. That is correct.
Are you ready on that? With permission, I just want to show a portion of the videotape where she's picking up the hat and the glove.
Mr. Harris?
May I, with the court's permission?
Yes.
Okay, I'll take that portion of the tape.
Doesn't look like it. There we go. Do we have it queued up to the portion that's pertinent here? Because we've already seen this tape before, counsel.
No, that's what I'm asking for, just the portion where she's picking it up.
Well, my question was, is it queued up?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
Mr. Mazzola, can you stop for 1 second? Can you stop 1 second, thanks. Mr. Mazzola, you a lefty?
Right-handed.
Okay, but you picked up the hat with your left hand, is that right?
Yes?
And, okay, and could you go forward then?
All right, let's frame 1351-4618.
Stop, stop. Now, Ms. Mazzola, at this point, you are using obviously the same hands with the same gloves, and you are opening up the bag, correct, for the next item?
Correct.
And the next item is the glove, right?
Correct.
And you are, okay, continue, please. Stop. Now, Ms. Mazzola, you used the same left hand to pick up the glove that you used to pick up the hat, right?
Correct.
In fact, you used the same fingers, didn't you?
I don't know if it's the exact same fingers, but I use the same hand.
All right. And, Ms. Mazzola, you didn't, in between picking up the hat and the glove, look down to see whether or not you had picked up any other biological material or any trace evidence on your hand, did you?
No?
In fact, before you picked up the hat, you didn't inspect your hand to see whether or not you had any other biological matter on your fingertips, did you?
No?
And after you picked up the hat and put it in the bag, you didn't inspect your hand to see whether or not there was any trace evidence from the hat before you picked up the glove, did you?
No?
Had you been taught to do that, ma'am, at the Sid Mini Academy?
No?
Would you agree, ma'am, that it's possible the trace evidence from the hat can be transferred to the rubber glove, transferred to your rubber glove when you pick it up?
It's possible.
And would you agree, ma'am, that it's possible the trace evidence that's on your rubber glove can then be transferred to the leather glove when you pick that up?
Improbable, since I handled other items between picking up the hat and the glove.
Ma'am, did you say before that one way the trace evidence gets transferred from one object to another is when those two objects come in contact?
Correct.
And would you agree that not every time two objects come in contact does trace evidence move from one object to the next, right?
Depends on what type of items they are.
Depends on what type of items they are, it depends where the fibers are, isn't that right?
Correct.
Depends where the hairs are.
Correct.
Okay. So you could handle several different things, and the hairs and fibers might not come off on the first thing or the second thing you touch, but might come off on the third item. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
Now, initially on direct examination, Ms. Mazzola, didn't you say that it wasn't necessary to change your gloves between picking up the hat and the leather glove because the two objects were touching? Did you testify to that on direct examination?
They were in close contact,
Did you
yes.
testify, not that they were simply in close contact, but did you testify that they were actually touching?
I don't remember if I said touching or close contact.
Well,
or
would
what.
you agree, I'm sorry, when you use the expression close contact, does that mean touching to you, or does that mean that the two objects are close to one another but not actually touching?
Could be anywhere from extremely close to each other to actually touching.
Well, how did you mean it when you said in close proximity, ma'am,
Extremely close,
but not necessarily touching?
not necessarily touching.
23. Wait 1 minute. Line 23, okay. Ms. Mazzola, when you testified on direct examination last week in this case, were you asked these questions and did you give these answers? Question: and did you change gloves in between collecting the hat and the glove? Answer: no. Question by Mr. Goldberg: why not? Answer: the hat and the glove at Bundy were touching each other. They were not in two completely separate areas. They were in physical contact with each other. Were you asked those questions and did you give those answers last week at this trial?
Apparently so, yes.
And, ma'am, after you testified to that, there was a recess, wasn't there?
I don't know if there was a recess or not.
Well, later on, Mr. Goldberg asked you the same question again about the physical relationship to the hat and the glove. Did he not?
I don't remember.
Right. Reading now from page 23790.
Seven.
23790. Very brief sidebar, Your Honor,
For what purpose?
to get a stipulation about a recess.
Proceed.
Are you ready on this other page? Sure. starting on one moment, Your Honor. Starting at line 24, 23. Okay? And, ma'am, after the luncheon recess, were you asked,
Ask, you need a foundational question for two.
well, ma'am, at page 23790, were you asked these questions and did you give these answers? Question by Mr. Goldberg. Okay. Now, you said on direct examination, when I was asking you about collecting the glove and the watch cap, the cap, that they were in close proximity or touching. Answer, uh-huh. Question, which was it? Answer, reviewing photographs, they were in very close proximity to each other. Were you asked those questions, did you give those answers?
Yes.
And just before you were asked those questions and you gave those answers at page 23790, were you sitting in this courtroom and present when Judge Ito said to you,
Wait. Do you recall if there was a recess of any type in between those questioning?
I honestly can't remember when the recesses are.
All right, court will
can I show
take,
the transcript for fresh recollection?
wait. We have a procedure called taking judicial notice of the court's own proceedings. I will take judicial notice, and the jury is to assume to be true the fact that there was in fact a recess in between those two questions. It's a matter of the court's own record. Proceed.
Thank you. Now, during that luncheon recess, Ms. Mazzola, did the prosecutor tell you that the photographs would not support your testimony that the hat and glove were actually touching?
Your Honor, I object to this. Perhaps we can approach. I object to counsel's insinuations.
Do you have any discussion with the prosecutor or any attorney regarding this issue over the...
I looked at a photograph.
Proceed.
And was that photograph shown to you by the prosecutor?
I can't recall who showed it to me, but I saw a photograph.
Well, you didn't have it on your own. Someone else in this building had to show it to you, is that right?
Correct.
And it was after you were shown those photograph, or a photograph, that you then changed your testimony after lunch, is that correct?
I saw that they were extremely close, but not touching, yes.
And so you changed your testimony after lunch, is that correct?
I corrected it, yes.
Thank you. And ma'am, is it your position that the reason you didn't have to change your gloves between picking up the hat and the glove is because the two items were in close proximity to one another?
Correct.
Well, when you make that decision, that two objects in close proximity but not touching don't require a change of gloves on your part, are you assuming that the hat and the glove were worn by the same person?
I don't assume anything.
And you can't assume anything
That's
about that,
correct.
can you?
That's correct.
So you don't know whether or not the hat and the glove were worn by the same person, do you?
That's correct.
You certainly didn't know that at the time you were collecting the items.
That's correct.
And you don't even know when the items were placed at that location where you collected them. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
You don't know whether those two items were placed on the ground at different times, do you?
That is correct.
And isn't it true, since you can't assume either of those two facts, ma'am, that one cannot assume that just because two items are close to one another, although not touching, that the trace evidence on one will most likely be on the other?
Assumes the fact not analysis it was trace evidence.
Sustain.
Well, in the event that there, I'm sorry, one moment. When you pick up the hat, you have to be careful because there may be trace evidence on it. That's something that you were taught at the SID Mini Academy, isn't that right?
I was taught that, yes.
And you're also taught to be careful with different items that are collected at a crime scene because they may have different types of hairs and fibers on them. Isn't that correct?
Not necessarily different hairs and fibers, but just hairs and fibers.
Well, were you taught to assume that all items found at a crime scene are likely to have the same hairs and fibers because they're found at the same crime scene?
There is no telling what type of hairs and fibers are present.
Okay. And there's no telling whether or not the same hairs and fibers on one object would be found on another object, correct?
Correct.
And you can't make that assumption based on how far apart two items are to one another, can you?
Correct.
So, ma'am, wouldn't you agree that your earlier testimony in this case that you didn't have to change your gloves between picking up the hat and the leather glove here because they were close to one another and therefore trace evidence on one would be on the other one is not really consistent with what you were taught by the SID people?
I don't know.
When you say you don't know, do you mean you don't know what the supervisors at SID taught you?
I'm saying I don't know if it would be inconsistent with,
Well, if the objects had been 15 feet apart, had you been taught by people at SID Academy to change gloves before picking up the different objects?
Oral.
gloves would be changed.
You were taught that they should be changed under those circumstances.
Well, if they were far apart, yes.
Well, I said 10 or 15 feet apart under
Right.
those circumstances.
Not getting down to exact distances, but far apart, yes.
Well, in your own mind, based on your own experience, do you consider 10 feet far apart?
Yes.
And so you would change the gloves under those circumstances.
Yes.
How about 5 feet?
Yes.
3 feet?
Yes.
But you made a decision here that because the two items were within inches of one another, that you didn't have to change the gloves. Is that correct?
Since that's not evidence, inches.
Oral.
The decision to change gloves was made. We did not change gloves.
Was the decision made by you, or was the decision given to you by Dennis Fung?
I can't recall if I asked him about it or what. I'm not exactly sure what conversation we had at that
I
time.
mean, it may very well be that you asked Dennis Fung whether you should change your gloves for this situation, and he said no.
It's possible.
Okay. Now, also on the 13th, did you recover a set of keys in the dirt at Bundy?
Yes.
And when you recovered that set of keys, Ms. Mazzola, did you notice that there was blood on them?
Since that's not evidence.
Oral.
I can't recall if I remember seeing blood or not.
Well, would you agree, based on your training, that the presence of blood on keys might be evidence that someone used the keys to defend themselves?
Also speculation.
Sustained.
Have you been trained as a criminalist to make an effort to identify relevant evidence?
Overly broad.
Oral.
Yes.
And have you been trained as a criminalist to identify when items of evidence have blood on them?
You notice if something has blood, yes.
And if it has blood on it, that's something that's going to get special attention from you as a criminalist, isn't it?
Vague as to special attention.
Oral.
It is handled slightly differently.
And so, if the keys had blood on them, as a criminalist, wouldn't you want to have those keys examined for serology purposes?
It is possible they would go to serology.
Well, don't the serologists and other people at SID expect the criminalist who is collecting the evidence to give them a debriefing, so to speak, of what you found and to hear your suggestions on as to what should be done? Isn't that something you're expected to do?
That would be up to the supervising criminalist.
Okay, and but you would agree that the supervising criminalist, whoever he or she may be in a given crime scene, is expected to brief the other people at SID as to what items may have relevant or potentially relevant evidence.
No foundation calls for speculation.
You can ask the question.
Yes,
And based on what you were taught, you would expect a supervising criminalist to tell the people at SID that keys that were recovered had blood on them.
Sustained.
Now, you also picked up an envelope which contained eyeglasses at the Bundy scene, didn't you?
yes,
Did you see the body of Mr. Goldman dragged across that envelope?
no,
You noted on your field notes that morning that the envelope contained eyeglasses, correct?
correct.
And in your training at SID, have you read personally or has anyone at SID read to you the following provision of the Los Angeles Police Department manual, referring to section 510.10?
This isn't a proper procedure, Your Honor. This is hearsay.
Sustained.
Well, in your training at SID, were you given instruction as to what methods to utilize for the proper booking of items of evidence?
Yes,
And were you told or instructed that when you take an item which is in a closed container, that you are expected to open that container to see what's inside? Is that something you've been taught?
that is something that's been mentioned, yes.
And is there in fact a standard procedure utilized at SID for inspecting envelopes or other types of closed containers when you collect them to investigate what's inside?
I don't know if there's a standard procedure or not.
Well, is it your procedure to simply open the item and look inside and see what's there?
I leave that to the more experienced criminalists.
Well, you noted on your property. You noted on your property, I'm sorry, withdrawn. You noted on your field notes, Ms. Mazzola, that item 39 that was collected was an envelope with glasses. Is that correct?
Check the item number. Yes,
And did Mr. Fung open the envelope in your presence to show you that there was a pair of eyeglasses inside?
the envelope was not securely closed. You could see there were glasses inside.
Okay, so you saw a pair of eyeglasses inside just by looking through a partial opening in the envelope?
Correct.
And when you examined that pair of eyeglasses inside, did there seem to be anything unusual about it?
We just know that there were eyeglasses inside, and that was the extent of it.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part of your answer, ma'am.
So we just noted that there were eyeglasses inside the envelope, and that was the extent of it.
And at that point, when you peered into that envelope, you didn't notice that anything was missing from those pair of eyeglasses, is that correct?
That's correct as far as I could see.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like the witness to open the envelope for item 39.
Do we have any butcher paper and
Pair of
gloves?
I guess you need gloves too.
Mr. Neufeld, I've asked Mrs. Robertson to see if she could get a sheet of butcher paper because of the nature of that item.
Thank you.
Why don't you just spread that out on the counter in front of you? All right, Mr. Neufeld, proceed. And this is evidence item, court evidence item, which, Mr. Neufeld?
It's People's Exhibit number 32.
People's
This is
32.
the larger plastic bag.
Thank you. Proceed. Mr. Goldberg, if you want to stand behind counsel there, you're welcome to
Now-
do so.
Now, Ms. Mazzola, before you begin opening this, the Ziploc bag, the large Ziploc bag that the items are in, can you tell what items are actually inside the Ziploc bag?
There is a brown paper bag with writing on it.
Okay.
There is a white envelope with writing on it, and appears to be a pair of glasses inside. And there appears to be 2 paper bindles with writing on each.
Now, the brown paper bag that you just described, would that be the brown paper bag that the white envelope with the eyeglasses in it was placed into at the crime scene?
Yes.
Okay. Could you please open the exhibit, please?
Don't you have that rule in New York? The witness is breaking the seals that are at the top zip part of the bag. Mr. Neufeld.
Now, could you please open the white envelope as well that was inside the bag? And remove the contents.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Now, Ms. Mazzola, how many lenses are inside that envelope?
1.
And this lens that you see in the envelope isn't even in the eyeglasses, right? It's outside the glasses, correct? But when you looked in the envelope that day, you said there was nothing unusual about the pair of eyeglasses, correct?
Overruled.
I saw a pair of glasses.
Okay. You didn't notice, I'm sorry, withdrawn. Would you please feel the rest of the brown paper bag to see if there's any other lens in that?
Does not appear to be anything.
And there are two small bindles in there. Could you feel those to see if there's a lens in that? You don't have to open it.
Does not appear to be a lens.
Ms. Mazzola, do you know what happened to the second lens after you collected this pair of eyeglasses on the morning of June 13th?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustained.
Well, Ms. Mazzola, you said a moment ago that when you collected the item, it was a pair of eyeglasses, correct?
Correct.
And you said that they were intact at that point, correct?
Sustained.
Ms. Mazzola, did you say that you didn't notice anything at all unusual about the pair of eyeglasses?
Overruled.
I believe I said I noticed a pair of eyeglasses.
And did you also say that you didn't notice anything unusual when you peered into that envelope and looked at the pair of eyeglasses?
I noticed that there were a pair of eyeglasses in the envelope. I did not open the envelope.
Did you also testify a moment ago that when you looked into the envelope, though, you didn't notice anything unusual?
From what I could see, and as far as I looked, they were just a pair of eyeglasses.
And if a lens was missing from the pair of eyeglasses, that would be unusual, would it not?
That would be it.
Overruled.
That would be yes.
To your knowledge, has any investigation been conducted by the Scientific Investigation Division of the Los Angeles Police Department to find out where the second lens is? If she knows.
Assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustained.
You can put that away now, man.
Thank you.
Actually, just wait 1 minute. With permission, I'd like to show another brief snippet of videotape.
Which videotape?
The videotape of, that was shown both on the direct examination, also by the defense.
That doesn't
of
help
Ms.
me. Which videotape?
Of Ms. Mazzola passing the envelope to Dennis Fung.
That comment assumes facts that aren't in evidence,
Well,
but you can show the videotape.
Passing an item to Dennis Fung behind the coroners.
You can show the videotape.
Item 1082, Exhibit 1082.
We're looking at frames 1335, 10 to 13.
Yeah, could you just back up a second, please? Okay. Now, Ms. Mazzola, you said on direct examination that the object, it was your opinion that the object that you were passing to Mr. Fung at this moment is not the envelope which contained the eyeglasses. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I believe you said that it was your practice not to pass an object that had blood on it to an individual who didn't have gloves on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is that your basis for concluding it's not the envelope?
That, and it does not appear to be the right packaging. The main thing is I would not pass anything with blood on it to an ungloved colleague.
Now, by the time you picked up that envelope, it's already sometime, what, around noon, would you say, on the 13th?
I don't know the exact time.
Well, it was certainly later than 11 o'clock in the morning, right?
Yes,
And by that time, the blood on the envelope had dried, had it not?
it might have.
And ma'am, isn't it true that one side of that envelope doesn't have very much blood on it? Take a look at it.
That's correct.
Could you please show the jury, hold it up for the jury, first the side, the back of the envelope, which has a fair amount of blood on it. And now please turn it around and display for the jury the side of the envelope which is pretty clean and doesn't have much blood on it. I withdraw that.
Jury can draw its own conclusion.
Right. Would you agree, ma'am, that the object in the video is not a brown bag?
Does not appear to be.
Let me just ask, 1492, were you able to see that? All right, thank you.
One moment. Could you turn over the envelope, please? And would you agree that it is not a coin envelope?
It does not appear to be one of the smaller coin envelopes.
Well, Ms. Mazzola, when you were packing items of evidence that day, the keys, the beeper, and other items, you put them in envelopes such as this that I'm showing you right now, indicating prosecution's exhibit 1630, D as in David?
They were in coin envelopes, the size depending on the size of the item.
Ma'am, isn't it true that that day on June 13th, you had no coin envelopes that were the size of the object shown in the picture that you're looking at right now?
I can't recall if we had that size in the kits or not. I don't know.
It's not a plastic bag, is it, Ms. Mazzola?
No,
And it's not the posse box, is it, Ms. Mazzola?
no,
And all of your notes that day were being written on a clipboard, is that correct?
that's correct.
You didn't keep any small pad for any other purpose, did you?
No,
And that's not the clipboard, is it?
no.
Before you took the witness stand on direct examination, during your prep session, were you told that the defense in this case had suggested that this item in this picture was in fact the envelope that contained the glasses? Had you been told that?
I remember it being mentioned, yes.
And had you been told also that when Dennis Fung was confronted with that allegation, that Dennis Fung denied it?
Which allegation?
That that item that you see in that image is in fact the envelope that contained the eyeglasses. Were you told that Dennis Fung denied it?
I might have been told that.
Right, referring
So-
to the image at 133407.
Yes. As C? It's being printed as sub-item C.
All right, 1082 sub C.
Right.
Thank you, counsel.
Now, when you testified at the trial last week on direct examination, Mr. Goldberg simply put up this image and asked you whether it was the envelope. Is that correct?
Well, it's irrelevant.
Oral.
It's not impeaching.
Oral.
I believe so.
But when you were prepped on this particular matter during the prep sessions, you had been told that it was the defense position that it was the envelope, weren't you? You've been told that.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And when you were told that, didn't Mr. Goldberg or other prosecutors tell you that it was the prosecution's position that it was not the envelope?
I don't believe they told me that they believed it was not the envelope.
Did they tell you they believed it was the envelope?
I don't recall if they told me one way or another.
And now going to show another small segment of the videotape that was shown by the prosecutor on direct examination.
Which item?
1078. See the brown object on the blanket?
There appears to be a dark object off to one side, yes.
Now, when you saw this videotape, when you were being prepped, I'm sorry, you did see this videotape while you were being prepped, didn't you?
I saw the videotape, yes.
Well, I mean, you didn't see it for the first time when you were on direct examination in this trial, did you?
That's correct.
And when you were being prepped by, I'm sorry, and when you testified at the trial, you were asked by Mr. Goldberg, is that the leather glove? And I believe you said no. Is that correct?
No, this isn't impeaching, it's
Oral.
it's not wrong.
I don't know if those were the exact words.
In sum and substance. Would that be a fair statement, ma'am?
Oral.
That would be a fair statement.
Okay. But when you were prepped by the prosecutor in this case, weren't you told that it was the defense position that the brown object that you see on the white sheet of white blanket in this picture was in fact the Bundy glove? Were you told that?
I was asked if I remember the glove being there in that position, and then they mentioned that the defense was thinking it was the glove.
Okay. And so you knew when you testified at trial here and said it wasn't the glove, that the defense was taking the position that it was the glove, correct? You knew that before you took the witness stand.
I testified to where I remember seeing the glove myself.
Well, Ms. Mazzola, you knew before you got on the witness stand at this trial that the defense was taking the position that that was the glove, didn't you?
Yes,
And Ms. Mazzola, when you got on the witness stand here on direct examination, had you already been told that that glove had been moved at least once? prior to the time that it was collected?
I think that I remember hearing that it had been turned over or moved slightly.
Had you been shown photographs which displayed the glove in two different locations?
Two different positions, yes.
All right. And would it be fair to say, Ms. Mazzola, that you didn't know when you saw the glove in those two different positions whether the glove had been moved from position 1 to some other position and then have had someone else return it to what you saw as position 2? Is that a fair statement?
Unintelligible.
I just testified to where I remember seeing the glove when I saw it.
But Ms. Mazzola, even before you testified as to where you remember seeing the glove, you told us a moment ago that you were shown photographs which showed the glove in two different positions, correct?
Correct?
And would you agree that for the glove to get into two different positions, it had to have been moved by somebody or something? Would that be correct?
Overruled.
Correct.
And isn't it also possible, Ms. Mazzola, that the glove was originally in the position displayed in the first photograph that you saw, and then somehow it got moved to another location, and then someone simply put it back close to where it was initially, and so you saw it in the second position?
Sustained. All right, council, we're going to take our recess at this point. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember all of my admonitions to you. Do not discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Do not conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. And do not allow anybody to communicate with you. And we will resume at 10:30. Ms. Mazzola, you may step down. If you would, repackage those items, please, and return them to Mrs. Robertson. We'll be in recess for 15. Again, on the witness stand, undergoing cross-examination by Mr. Neufeld. Good morning again, Ms. Mazzola.
Good morning.
You're again reminded you are under oath. Mr. Neufeld, you may conclude.
Thank you. In direct examination, Ms. Mazzola, you testified that a criminalist must use his or her discretion in deciding which items to collect.
Correct.
And I believe you testified that a criminalist can't simply pick up every little bit of paper at a crime scene. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I believe it was your position that if you do that, you're simply adding a lot of garbage. Is that what you said, ma'am?
Something to that effect.
Now, I'll show the witness item, Exhibit 1080, 1080. Now, Ms. Mazzola, you see the piece of paper on the tile in between the person who is pointing and the white envelope?
On the tile?
Did you see a piece of paper on the ground?
There appears to be something on the tile.
Well, it's an object
On the
other
walk-
than the tile itself. Is that correct?
Excuse me, Mr. Neufeld, you need to let Ms. Mazzola finish answering.
Sorry, Your Honor. Sorry, Ms. Mazzola.
It appears to be something other than the tile.
And I'd like you to take a look at the photo itself. You may see better resolution, Ms. Mazzola.
Okay.
Would you agree that it appears to be a piece of paper that's on the, sitting on the tile?
Yes.
And, Ms. Mazzola, that piece of paper was not collected by you on June 13th, was it?
No, I did not remember seeing the paper on June 13th.
And you never saw Dennis Fung collect that piece of paper, did you?
No.
Had you seen that piece of paper, you would have certainly collected it, wouldn't you?
I would have looked at it to find out what it was.
Well, wouldn't you be concerned as a criminalist that that piece of paper found so close to the body of Nicole Brown Simpson could have a fingerprint belonging to the assailant?
Yes, it's possible.
And that if the assailant was bleeding at this point in time, that that piece of paper might have a drop of blood that belonged to the assailant, correct?
It's a possibility.
That piece of paper might even have writing on it, which would give some indication as to either the identity or the motive of whomever or however many people that were involved in this case were the assailants.
Sustained.
In other words, Ms. Mazzola, that piece of paper found so close to the body of Nicole Brown Simpson could have been a very relevant piece of evidence.
Sustained, but the jury can draw their own conclusion given the proximity.
Now, Ms. Mazzola, calling your attention now to the drops of blood that were on the walkway at Bundy. You collected 5 drops of blood, is that correct? 5 blood stains on that walkway.
Let me check and make sure exactly
do.
how many. Ms. Mazzola, the reason that you collected those drops is because you had been told by the detectives that these drops might perhaps come from the person who was the assailant, as a possibility. Weren't you told that? That was a possibility, yes.
And the detectives, I believe, walked you and Dennis Fung along that walkway, pointing out the different blood drops or blood stains to you, did they not?
I went up to a certain point on the walkway. They were pointing out the drops, yes.
And when you say they were pointing out the drops, they were pointing out the stains, isn't that right?
Correct.
And now that you have seen Detective Lang and Van Adder, and you know what they look like, the detectives who took you on this walkthrough, were either of them Detective Lang or Van Adder?
I can't remember which ones were there that day.
How many different detectives took you on that walkthrough, approximately?
I wasn't counting detectives, I don't know.
All right, well, was it more than 2?
It was more than one.
All right. And they were both speaking and pointing out different items to you and Dennis Fung?
They were talking to Mr. Fung, yes.
And you could hear what they were saying?
Certain portions, yes.
And you collected every stain that you saw along this walkway, did you not?
The stains were in the trail, yes.
Okay. And could you step down for 1 second, please?
All right, you have the long pointer there. Mr. Neufeld.
Okay. Ms. Mazzola, you said you collected every stain that was along that walkway, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't simply say, I will only collect representative stains, did you?
On this, no.
You made a decision with Dennis Fung that you would collect each and every stain along that way, correct?
I was told to pick up every stain,
By Dennis Fung.
yes.
And he told you that even before you started picking up the stains, didn't he?
Yes.
Now, item number 50, by the way, isn't it true that you would collect items of evidence in sequence?
As much as possible, yes.
So the photo ID numbers that you use, such as 112 for item 47, was collected before photo ID number 113, which corresponds to item 48. Isn't that right? That was your practice.
For the most part,
Well, was that your practice to do that?
Asked and answered.
on this occasion, we started working on the trail, the walkway, because we wanted to get those stains up first.
Okay. Well, did you pick up the stains on the walkway before you picked up the perishables and loose items of evidence, such as the hat and the glove and the keys?
No, they were recovered first, and then we went on to the walkway.
Okay, so first you picked up the items, the perishable items, and then you started collecting the stains. Is that right?
Sustained, assumes facts that aren't in evidence.
First you started collecting the non-stain evidence, and then you went on to collect stains. Is that correct?
Correct.
And when you got to that walkway and you started collecting them, did you collect item 47 first on the walkway?
Yes,
And then you collected item 48, correct?
correct.
And then you collected item 49, is that right? Could you please point out to the jury where items 47, 48, and 49 are?
47, right here. 8, and 49.
Can you see that too? And then, did you then go on to pick up item 50?
Yes,
And could you please point out where item 50 is? And would you agree, ma'am, that item 50 is located simply a few feet from the back gate along that walkway?
on the diagram, it appears to be close to the back gate.
Right? And in fact, ma'am, then at some point did you pick up item 52 after you picked up item 50?
Yes,
And to get to item 52, you had to walk through the back gate, didn't you?
I just kept on going. There was no gate barring my way.
Well, Ms. Mazzola, are you saying that there was no gate at the Bundy walkway on June 13th, 1994? Is that your testimony?
I do not recall seeing a gate on that morning.
Well, Ms. Mazzola, if other witnesses had testified that they were absolutely certain that there was a gate present at the rear of that walkway on June 13th, would that affect your testimony today as to whether or not there was a gate there on June 13th?
It's an improper hypothetical.
Sustained.
Do you have any reason to believe, Ms. Mazzola, that there wasn't a gate there on June 13th when you collected the evidence?
Argumentative assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained. Ms. Mazzola, have you been back to the scene since at Bundy?
Yes, I have.
Have you seen the gate back there?
I have seen the gate since, yes.
Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. When you were at the SID Mini Academy, Ms. Mazzola, did they teach you how to look for evidence?
Yes,
In fact, when you were at Rockingham that morning, Ms. Mazzola, you and Dennis Fung looked all along the driveway systematically for every possible red stain along the way, didn't you?
yes,
And you'd been taught to do that at the SID Mini Academy, hadn't you?
yes,
And likewise, Ms. Mazzola, at Bundy, as you proceeded along that walkway, in that line, you were looking for as many red stains as could be there, correct?
in that trail, yes.
And when you say that trail, you mean all the way from where 47 is, and could you point to 47, please? And now could you point to 52? And all along that line, connecting those two dots, from 47 to 52, you were looking systematically all along that way for any red stains. Isn't that correct?
The area had already been searched for red stains. I was following the trail that I was told to pick up.
Ms. Mazzola, a moment ago I asked you whether or not you had been taught to systematically examine trail or walkway for any and all red stains.
Yes.
I believe you answered yes. Is that correct?
Correct.
And when you were at the Bundy location that day, ma'am, were you also systematically examining that walkway from item 47 to item 52 for the presence of red stains?
It's vague as to whether you as collective or individual.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Were you doing that?
It had already been searched for red stains before I started collecting them.
Yes. And the person who searched for red stains before you started collecting it was you and Dennis Fung. Isn't that correct?
Myself up to a certain point with Mr. Funk, and the detectives and Mr. Funk continued on out the back.
Ms. Mazzola, who told you to pick up item 52?
Mr. Funk,
He told you that there was a blood stain outside the rear gate, correct?
he told me there was a blood stain on the driveway.
Have you been taught, Ms. Mazzola, at the SID Mini Academy to independently look for evidence when you're at a crime scene?
To a certain extent, yes.
Have you been taught, Ms. Mazzola, to keep your eyes open as you walk through a crime scene to see if there's any relevant evidence?
Yes.
And Ms. Mazzola, did you keep your eyes open when you left item 50 and headed through the rear gate to item 52?
My eyes were open when I went out the back. to the
Okay.
driveway.
And when you walked out that back, you didn't see any red stains on the rear gate, did you?
She inspects and I noticed she saw the gate.
Whoa, whoa.
I honestly don't remember seeing a gate there.
Well, Ms. Mazzola, now that you said you've been back to that location, correct?
Correct.
And you know the gate is there.
Correct.
And you know from speaking to other people about this case that the gate was there, in fact, on the 13th, don't you?
Yes, it was there on the 13th.
And so once again, I ask you, when you were walking from item 50 to item 52 with your eyes open, did you notice any bloodstains on the gate?
I did not notice a gate.
Did you notice any bloodstains there, Ms. Mazzola?
This is bad, Chair, next to answer.
Sustained. She's answered she didn't see the gate. If she didn't see the gate, she couldn't see anything that wasn't on it. Or was on it.
Thank you. Let me turn to this. Ms. Mazzola, when you were prepped to testify in this case by the prosecutors, were you told that there was an issue in this case, that is, the fact that blood drops, alleged blood drops, were not recovered from the gate on June 13th, but were recovered from the gate 3 weeks later? Were you told that
I remember hearing something about that.
during the prep sessions?
I can't recall if it was during the prep sessions or not.
And were you told during those prep sessions, Ms. Mazzola, that one way to deal with that particular problem would be to say that you never even saw the gate when you were there?
No.
Did you come up with that idea on your own, ma'am?
Sustained.
When you went back to Rockingham for the second time, Ms. Mazzola, did you make any contemporaneous note to indicate the time that you arrived back at Rockingham?
I don't believe we did.
Now, do you know what time you left Bundy?
The approximate time, yes.
And how do you know the approximate time?
Because it was written down while we were in the truck going back to Rockingham.
And where did you write that down?
I believe it was in the notes.
Which note?
Let me check.
May I first the witness to see what note she's looking at?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Goldberg?
I have it written down here.
Well, when you say you have it written down here, that's not an original entry that was made contemporaneous to the making out of these field notes on the 13th, is it?
Doesn't appear to be.
Okay. Do you have any contemporaneous note that you made to indicate what time you left Bundy?
There doesn't appear to be.
And a moment ago, ma'am, when you testified that you wrote down the time you had left Bundy while you and Dennis Fung were in the van on the way back to Rockingham, is that something that you had just made up?
Overruled.
I believe we had written down the time.
Well, what was your basis, when you testified a moment ago, that you wrote down the time you left Bundy in the van while you and Dennis Fung were on your way back to Rockingham?
That I knew the approximate time that we had left Bundy.
But did you have an independent recollection of actually writing it down while you were in the van in transit?
I can't remember if I recall if it was exactly when we were in the van, if we had just left or we were sitting in the truck getting ready to leave or
But
what.
you said you had an independent recollection. I'm sorry. Okay,
Counsel?
sorry. Please.
No, go ahead.
But a moment ago, you testified that you did have a recollection that either while you were sitting in the van or while the van was in transit, that you actually wrote down an entry as to the time that you had left Bundy. Wasn't that what you just testified to a little while ago?
Correct.
My question to you is, ma'am, when you testified to that a little while ago, did you simply make that up?
No, I thought we had.
And what was your basis for believing that you had done that?
That I knew the approximate time we had left.
Well, and what was the source of your information as to the approximate time that you left?
The time that I had in my notes.
But the time you just put in your note is not a note that you made on June 13th, is it?
It appears not to be.
All right, now we've gone through this twice now.
As best you can recall at this time, Ms. Mazzola, what time did you leave Bundy?
Approximately 3:15 or so.
Yet, would you agree, Ms. Mazzola, that you have no independent basis for estimating that time?
Sustained.
Now, when you first got back to Rockingham, Ms. Mazzola, the first place you inspected was the exterior south side of Mr. Simpson's residence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And while you were down inspecting and examining that location on Mr. Simpson's property, you noticed a red mark on a wire hanging down. Did you not?
It was brought to my attention that there was a red mark on a wire back there.
And who was it who brought that to your attention?
I can't remember if it was Mr. Fung or a detective.
And after it was brought to your attention, did you then return to the front of the house to go get your stain collection kit?
Yes,
And then once you got the stain collection kit, you alone went back to the side of the house to collect that stain. Is that right?
correct.
And that reddish discoloration that you collected on that wire, that became item number 11, did it not?
Yes,
And you collected that item number 11 without Dennis Fung even being present to observe. Isn't that correct?
that's correct.
And just like the other stains that you collected that day, you swatched the reddish area, did you not?
I swatched the area that came up phenol positive. I had trouble seeing exactly the red mark itself.
Ms. Mazzola, you saw a reddish discoloration on the wire?
It was pointed out to me, but I still couldn't quite make it out.
You're saying that you couldn't make out that it was a reddish stain on the wire before you collected it? Is that your testimony?
The wire was dirty, and we did a phenol test on it.
Ms. Mazzola, I'm asking, may I have a sidebar, Your Honor? This-
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
With the court reporter. Thank you, counsel. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with regards to Ms. Mazzola's testimony concerning the testing of the wire using the phenolphthalein presumptive test, I'm going to direct you to disregard her testimony that she got a positive result from that test. The reason for that is phenolphthalein is what is called a presumptive test. It only means that it's possible that blood is there, but other things also give a positive test. And unless there is a test to confirm that it is in fact blood and human blood, then you should not consider that result. So since there is no confirmatory test on this particular wire, you are to disregard the fact that there was a positive phenolphthalein result on the wire. All right, thank you. Mr. Neufeld. I will allow the testimony to stand, however, as to her taking the swatch.
Oh, yes. You mean taking the swatch and putting it in the bag?
Yes,
Okay.
proceed.
In fact, when you collected item number 11, Ms. Mazzola, did you make a control swatch?
Yes,
And then you also made a separate swatch of the item of evidence, is that correct?
correct.
And even before you collected item 11, Ms. Mazzola, did you make an entry in your field notes indicating the location of the item?
Yes,
And when you collected the item, did you also make an entry in your field notes as to the time at which you collected it?
yes.
And what was the time, ma'am?
It's approximately 1540.
Now, Ms. Mazzola, you testified that you learned, subsequent to your testifying on August 23rd, that it really was not necessary for you to fill in the time for every item that you collected at a crime scene. Is that correct?
Correct.
And were you told that you only had to enter the times where it was relevant?
Some people said that, yes.
Well, let me ask you what your criteria were on June 13th. What was your criteria for deciding when to write down a time on the field notes as opposed to those instances where you chose not to write down a time?
I really don't remember what my criteria was at the time.
Well, by looking at your field notes now, can you reconstruct what your reason was for writing down times that you collected some items, but not writing down the times that you collected other items?
Not really, no.
But it is your best recollection that the primary criteria should be when the criminalist believes it relevant. Is that right?
From what I've learned subsequent to that, yes.
Now, for item number 6, which was a blood stain at Rockingham, you did write down the time, did you not?
I believe so.
Why don't you check your notes?
Let me make sure. Yes,
But you didn't write down the time for any of the stains that you collected at Bundy. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Now, is the reason that you gave that kind of disparate treatment to the single drop at Rockingham as opposed to any and all of the stains at Bundy because you believe that item number 6 at Rockingham was relevant and the time you collected item number 6 at Rockingham was relevant, but the time that you collected any and all of the stains at Bundy were irrelevant?
Unintelligible and also single drop mistakes to the testimony.
Overruled. Do you understand the question?
Not really.
Rephrase the question.
Certainly. You would agree that you didn't note the time that you collected any of the stains at Bundy, is that right?
That's correct.
My question, therefore, Ms. Mazzola, is the reason that you recorded the time you collected item number 6 at Rockingham, but didn't record the collection of any of the stains at Bundy because you deemed time to be relevant for item number 6, but irrelevant with respect to all the blood drops at Bundy?
No,
Well, if relevant was supposed to be the criteria by which you decided whether to note the time, then what was the reason why you noted it for number 6 at Rockingham, but didn't note it for a single stain at Bundy?
Assumes facts and evidences testimony.
Overruled.
I learned that it would be relevant since then. At the time, I was trying to keep track of the time. When we arrived at Bundy, Mr. Fung informed me that we'd be collecting a lot of samples. The time that we started picking up, the time that we ended, keep an eye on that. Individual samples don't bother.
Well, when you say the time that you started, you mean the time you collected the first item and the time that you collected the last item?
He said, try to keep an eye on that, and that
Okay.
was it.
Did you note, what was the first blood stain that you collected at Bundy? Bundy.
Property item 41.
That was the first stain you collected? And did you note in your field notes the time that you collected the first stain?
No,
And what was the last stain that you collected at Bundy?
the last stain was from a shoe print that Mr. Fung lifted.
And did you note the time of that?
No, we did not.
So is it now your best recollection that Dennis Fung told you to note the time you collected the first stain and the time you collected the last stain, but you simply forgot to do it?
Yes.
And once you entered the house, after you collected item 11, the first item that you collected inside the house was item number 12, is that right?
Correct.
And those would be the drops of blood that you found in the foyer of Mr. Simpson's home.
Correct.
And before you collected item number 12, you did an inspection of the first floor of the house, did you not?
I can't remember if we inspected first or picked up first.
All right. Well, what time did you actually pick up item number 12? Did you record that in your notes?
Let's see. Yes,
And what time was that?
16:30,
That would be 3:30, 3:30? No, 4:30.
4:30.
4:30 in the afternoon. Thank you. And either before or after you picked up item 12, you did do an inspection of the first floor of the house looking for bloody clothing, is that right?
For blood in general.
All right, looking for blood stains,
Correct.
looking for blood smears,
Correct.
looking for flecks of dried blood.
Correct.
And you examined the kitchen, didn't you?
Yes.
You examined the kitchen sink?
I did not personally.
Well, do you know whether Dennis Fung examined the kitchen sink?
Overruled.
Personally, I don't know if he did or not.
Right? Did you examine the laundry room?
Yes.
Did you examine the living room
Yes.
and the dining room?
Yes.
And would you agree that except for the several drops that you found right in the foyer inside the front door, that there were no bloodstains found anywhere on the first floor of that house?
That's correct.
And that there was no blood smears found anywhere on the first floor of that house?
That's correct.
And that there were no blood flakes, flakes of dry blood, found anywhere on the first floor of that house?
We did not find any.
Well, and that's what you were looking for, weren't you?
That's correct.
And you were taught, ma'am, looking for blood evidence to examine the location in a systematic way. Isn't that correct?
It is redundant.
Not to the inside of the house.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Especially with negative results.
And after you inspected the first floor, you went up to the second floor, is that right?
That's correct.
And did you inspect counters?
Yes.
Did you inspect light switchers?
Yes.
Did you inspect the shelves in Mr. Simpson's closet?
As the shelves themselves or the contents? What?
Just the front of the shelves
I
for any sign of blood?
don't remember if we looked at the front of the shelves or not.
Did you look at knobs on the drawers?
I believe so.
And no flakes of dried blood were found in those locations that I just enumerated to you, is that correct?
That's correct.
And no smears of wet blood were found in those locations that I just enumerated to you?
We did not find any.
One moment. And while you were there, Ms. Mazzola, did you inspect either the intercom or the telephone to see whether or not there were any bloodstains on it?
I did not personally know.
Do you know whether Dennis Fung did?
I do not know personally if he did or not.
Well, telephone's one of the locations that you were taught at the SID Mini Academy to examine for the presence of blood.
We were not taught to look at the phone. We were taught to look at things in general.
Now, up on the second floor in Mr. Simpson's bedroom, were you shown a pair of dark socks on the floor?
There were a pair of dark socks on the floor.
And who pointed out the socks to you?
I don't know if it was one of the detectives or Mr. Fung.
Didn't you and Dennis Fung ascend the stairs together to the second floor?
I don't know if we were together all the time or not. I can't remember.
Not all the time, but were you together when you went upstairs? When you left the first floor and went to the second floor?
We were both on the second level at the same time.
And at that point in time, you were still looking for any sign of blood, is that correct?
Yes,
And you were also looking to see whether or not any of the clothing had blood, is that correct?
yes.
And was Dennis Fung already in the room where the socks were prior to your arrival in that room?
I don't think so, but I can't be positive.
Did Dennis Fung pick up the socks in your presence?
He collected the socks, yes.
And did he give them to you to put into a brown paper bag, or did he put it in the bag himself?
He put them in the bag himself,
And you saw him do that?
yes.
And you said a moment ago that both you and Dennis Fung were looking for blood, is that right?
Yes,
And you saw, of course, Dennis Fung examine or look at the socks before he put them into the bag, did he not?
I don't know if I was watching him all the time or not.
So as you sit here today, you don't know whether or not and to what extent Dennis Fung examined those socks before putting them in the bag. Is that your testimony?
Yes,
Did you personally observe the socks before, or examine the socks up close before they were put in the bag?
no,
You relied on Dennis Fung to do that?
yes.
Well, as soon as facts run down, this is done.
I'm asking her
Overruled.
state of mind. That's-
Overruled.
And while you were in that room with Dennis Fung, did he at any point express to you, "Oh, I see blood on the socks"?
Sustained.
Did Dennis Fung say anything to you to indicate that he observed stains on the socks?
Sustained.
When you were up in the bedroom, did you examine the carpet where the socks were found?
I did not personally, no.
Did you see Dennis Fung look at the carpet where the socks were found?
Okay, this is a lot.
Overruled.
I can't remember if I saw him looking at the carpet while he picked up the socks or
Well,
not.
Ms. Mazzola, you said that you and he, it was your purpose to be examining items in the house for the presence of blood. Is that correct?
As to the carpet only, would you focus in on that, please?
That's why, okay.
But we've all been to Mr. Simpson's home, the jury, counsel. We've seen the number of items that are there. If we go through each and every item, we'll be here for a long time.
agree, Your Honor,
suggest we
sorry.
not do that,
Okay.
especially since there are only a few items in the house.
Needless to, well, with respect to the carpet in the room,
Respect to the carpet.
both the large carpet and the smaller area rug as well. You didn't observe any flecks of blood on that carpeting, isn't that right?
The areas I looked at, I did not.
And you did not observe any smears of blood on that carpet or on that rug, isn't that correct?
On the areas I looked at, I did not.
And nor did you observe any drop of blood at either of those locations, did you?
On the areas I looked at, I did not.
And in the areas that you looked at on that carpet and on that rug, did you observe any soil?
I can't remember if I saw soil or not.
Well, if you saw an unusual amount of, if you saw any soil at all, would it have been your standard practice to call that to Dennis Fung's attention?
It depends on what you regard as any amount. I mean, carpet naturally has some dirt on it.
Did you see any soil as opposed to other types of debris on the rug or on the carpet when you inspected it on June 13th?
I do not believe so.
And you said that the one place that you actually saw a red stain was on the floor of the bathroom in the master bedroom. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it was just a small, faint smear, wasn't it?
It was small, yes.
It wasn't a drop, it was simply a smear. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
And you do not know, or did not know at the time, how long that faint smear of blood had been on that floor, do you?
I don't know, no.
Well, Miss Mazzola, have either you or any member of your family ever cut yourself shaving in the bathroom?
Sustained.
Ms. Mazzola, based on your professional experience, do you find it unusual that you would see one small faint smear of blood on the floor of a bathroom?
Sustained. Is there any way to date blood samples that you find at scenes?
With my experience, I don't know.
Move on.
Now, Ms. Mazzola, when you returned to Rockingham that afternoon, you did collect several items of evidence, isn't that right?
That's right.
And it was your practice to write down on the field notes every item of evidence that you and Mr. Fung received, isn't that right?
Yes.
And it was the standard procedure at SID that you would record the collection of each item in the field notes at or about the time that the item was actually received. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, over the 2 days, June 13th and June 14th, you were asked to record the collection of approximately 50 or so items. Isn't that correct?
I'm not sure exactly how many. Quite a few.
Well, could you look at your notes to refresh your recollection to see the approximate number of items that you collected during those 2 days?
Doesn't the evidence collection sheet speak for itself? The jury's seen it. We know it's a lot of items.
Well, I believe, Your Honor, it's approximately 50, 55 items, and I didn't want to testify.
I agree. Do we need to have the time to have the witness sit here and count the number of items?
Ms. Mazzola, other than the blood vial belonging to Mr. Simpson, isn't it a fact that every other item was recorded over those 2 days contemporaneous to its being collected?
Except 2 items we recovered before we left Rockingham on that day.
You said except for 2 items?
Correct.
And what number were those 2 items?
Property items 15 and 16.
Well, in your field notes, did you make an entry that property items 15 and 16 were collected at approximately 1700 hours?
That is the entry, yes.
And did you make that entry in the afternoon while you were at Rockingham before you left Rockingham?
No.
When and where did you make those entries for items 15 and 16, Ms. Mazzola?
It was the following day at the laboratory.
Do you have an independent recollection of that?
It was at the laboratory the next day.
No, I'm asking you, do you have an independent recollection that it was at the laboratory the next day? Or did someone tell you or suggest to you that that's when it was?
It's my handwriting. That was the only time it could be.
Well, no, Ms. Mazzola, your handwriting appears in these field notes as saying the time of collection was 1700 hours. By looking at your handwriting in those notes, you can't tell whether you made that entry at approximately 1700 hours on June 13th or the next day, can you?
It was not made on June 13th
And how do you know that it was not made on June 13th?
because our field notes were in the posse box, which was locked in the back of the truck at the time.
Ms. Mazzola,
Are you saying that you did not collect items 15 and 16 until after the, I'm sorry, what were the field notes on? A clipboard?
The posse box, yes, clipboard.
Well, no. Is a posse box different than a clipboard?
It serves as a posse box and clipboard. There is a place to hold the papers on the outside.
All right. And are you saying that before you collected items 15 and 16, you had already put the posse box into the rear of the van and locked the van?
Yes,
And how do you know that items 15 and 16 were collected after the posse box was locked in the van as opposed to before?
because our kits were also in the back of the truck that had our packaging material.
Ms. Mazzola, your kits with your packaging material were locked in the box, I'm sorry, your kits with your packaging material were locked in the rear of the van at the same time you locked the posse box in the rear of the van, is that correct?
That's correct.
And have you seen a videotape showing you walking to the van with your kit?
I've seen many videos, but I believe I've seen a few with us walking to the truck with the kits.
And when you're walking to the truck with kits, you're also walking with a posse box, correct?
I believe the posse box is also there, yes.
And on that videotape that you saw, which showed you walking to the back of the van with those items, there was a time code on that tape, was there not?
I don't remember.
Well, one moment, Your Honor. Take a minute, 'cause I didn't anticipate it, I'm sorry.